They threw stones at her face. Everyone watched. One cowboy stepped between her and death. Love was born from courage.
Subscribe to Wild Sky Stories. Turn on the bell icon so you can do not miss any new video.
The Arizona sun burned mercilessly over the dusty main street of Copper Springs as Samuel Hartley rode into town on his weathered brown mare. He had spent 3 years driving cattle across territories, sleeping under stars that never asked questions and never judged a man for the emptiness in his heart. At 32 years old, Samuel carried scars both visible and hidden, the kind that came from losing everything that ever mattered. He had just dismounted near the general store when he heard the commotion. A crowd had gathered near the old well at the center of town, and their voices carried ugly words that made his jaw tighten. Samuel had learned long ago that crowds in small towns rarely gathered for anything good. Walking closer, he saw her. She stood alone in the center of the circle, her long black hair hanging past her shoulders, her skin the color of warm copper in the afternoon light. She wore a simple dress that had seen better days, and her dark eyes held a fierce pride that refused to bow despite the hatred surrounding her. An Apache woman, alone, facing down an entire town. "We do not want your kind here," the mayor was saying, his fat finger pointing at her chest. "Go back to your people before we make you leave. My people are gone," she said, her voice steady despite everything. "The soldiers came 3 moons ago. I have nowhere else to go." A man in the crowd threw a stone. It struck her shoulder, and she flinched but did not cry out. Samuel felt something twist inside his chest. Something he thought had died years ago when he buried his young wife after the fever took her. What should Samuel do? If you want Samuel to walk away and mind his own business, continue reading from the paragraph that begins with Samuel turned away. If you want Samuel to step forward and protect her, continue reading from the paragraph that begins with Samuel pushed through the crowd. Samuel pushed through the crowd before his mind could talk his body out of it. He stepped in front of the woman, placing himself between her and the angry mob. His hand rested on the pistol at his hip, and his eyes swept across the faces before him with the cold calculation of a man who had faced death more times than he cared to remember. "That is enough," he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who meant every word. "She has done nothing wrong," the mayor sputtered, his round face turning red. "Hartley, this is none of your concern. She is Apache. Her people killed settlers not 50 miles from here just last spring." "Did she kill them?" Samuel asked. "Were you there? Did you see her do anything?" Silence fell over the crowd. The woman behind him remained still, and he could feel her eyes on his back, questioning, perhaps wondering what price this stranger would demand for his protection. "She is one of them," someone shouted from the back. "That is enough." Samuel drew his pistol slowly, not pointing it at anyone, just letting the metal catch the sunlight. "I lost my wife 4 years ago to a fever that did not care what color her skin was or what language she spoke. Hate killed my brother in the war between states. I have seen enough ugliness to know it when I see it, and I am seeing it right now." The crowd began to disperse, muttering and throwing dark glances over their shoulders. Samuel holstered his weapon and turned to face the woman he had just defended. Up close, she was beautiful in a way that caught him off guard. Her eyes were not just dark, but deep, holding stories and sorrows he recognized because he carried his own. A small cut on her cheek from a thrown stone dripped blood down her jaw. "You did not have to do that," she said. "They will hate you now too. They already do not like me much. I am a drifter. That is almost as bad as being Apache in these parts." He offered her his bandana. "For your face, the cut needs cleaning." She hesitated before taking it, pressing the fabric against her cheek. "I am called Aiyana. It means eternal blossom in my language. Samuel Hartley. Most folks just call me Sam. Why did you help me, Sam?" He considered the question, looking at the now empty street, at the closed doors and shuttered windows. "Because someone should have, and no one else was going to. What should happen next?
If you want Samuel to offer Aiyana work at his small ranch outside town, continue reading from the paragraph that begins with Samuel had a small piece of land.
If you want Aiyana to try leaving town on her own, continue reading from the paragraph that begins with Aiyana pressed the bandana into his hand. Samuel had a small piece of land about 5 miles outside of town, a modest cabin with a barn that needed repairs, and a garden that had grown wild since he was too busy with cattle drives to tend it. He had won it in a card game 2 years back and had been meaning to settle down but never found a reason to stay. "I have a ranch," he said, surprising himself with the offer. "It is not much, but there is a spare room in the barn that stays warm. You could work for me, help with the horses in the garden. Honest pay, honest work." Aiyana studied him with those deep eyes, searching for the lie, the hidden motive. "And what would you want in return?" "Work. Nothing more. I give you my word, and my word is the only thing I have left that is worth anything." She was quiet for a long moment. Behind them, the town had fallen into an uneasy silence. Samuel knew they were being watched from behind curtains and through cracks. "Indoors. I will come," she finally said. "But if you break your word, I will leave, and you will not try to stop me. Fair enough." The first weeks were difficult. Aiyana worked hard, harder than any hand Samuel had ever hired. She repaired fences, tended the garden, cared for the horses with a gentleness that made even his most stubborn mare calm under her touch. She spoke little, and Samuel found he did not mind the silence. There was a comfort in it, a peace he had not felt in years. But at night, he would sometimes hear her crying softly in the barn, mourning a people and a life that had been ripped away from her. Those sounds broke something inside him, made him remember his own nights of grief after burying Margaret, his wife, in that small cemetery back in Kansas. One evening, he brought her supper in the barn and found her sitting against the wall, her face wet with tears she quickly tried to hide. What should Samuel do? If you want Samuel to give her space and leave the food without speaking, continue reading from the paragraph that begins with Samuel set down the plate. If you want Samuel to sit beside her and share his own pain, continue reading from the paragraph that begins with Samuel lowered himself to the ground. Samuel lowered himself to the ground beside her, close enough to offer comfort, but far enough to respect her space. He set the plate between them and stared at his worn boots. "I had a wife once," he said quietly, "Margaret. She had hair the color of wheat and a laugh that could make flowers grow, or so I told her. The fever took her in the winter of '68. She was carrying our first child." Aiyana's crying had stopped. She was listening now, her eyes fixed on his profile in the dim lantern light. "I wanted to die after that," he continued. "Spent 2 years trying to drink myself into the grave. Then one morning I woke up and realized that dying would not bring her back. It would just mean there was no one left to remember her. My mother taught me to weave baskets," Aiyana said softly. "My father could track a deer through stone. My little sister had just learned to make bread the morning the soldiers came." Her voice cracked. "I hid in the river, under the roots of an old tree. I heard everything. I could not save them." Samuel felt tears burning his own eyes. "It was not your fault. Surviving is not a sin, Aiyana. It is a burden, but it is not a sin." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and something passed between them. Recognition, understanding. Two broken souls finding each other in the wreckage of their separate losses. "Thank you," she whispered, "for seeing me. Not my people, not the enemy, just me." "I see you," he said. "I have seen you since that first day in town." As the months passed, the walls between them began to crumble like old adobe in the rain. Samuel found himself looking for reasons to work near wherever Aiyana was. She started bringing him water in the fields without being asked, staying to talk about the horses or the weather or the way the sunset painted the mountains purple. He taught her to read, using his old Bible, the only book he owned. She taught him words in her language, laughing at his terrible pronunciation, until her laugh became his favorite sound in the world. He taught her to shoot, standing behind her to adjust her aim, his hands trembling when they touched her shoulders. She taught him to track animals through the brush, and he marveled at how she read the land like most folks read newspapers. The town had not forgotten them. Occasionally, riders would pass the ranch, shouting insults before galloping away. The general store refused to sell to Samuel anymore, so he had to ride 30 miles to the next town for supply. The preacher told him his soul was in danger, but none of it mattered. Not when Aiyana smiled at him across the supper table. Not when she fell asleep against his shoulder on the porch while they watched stars wheel overhead. Not when he caught her looking at him with something warm and terrifying in her eyes. One night, as autumn painted the territory gold and orange, Samuel found Aiyana standing in the garden she had brought back to life, her face lifted to the moon. "It is beautiful here," she said as he approached. "When I first came, I thought I would never feel peace again. I was wrong." Samuel stood beside her, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Aiyana, I need to tell you something." She turned to face him, and in the moonlight, she looked like something from a dream, something sacred and precious. "I love you," he said, the words tumbling out before fear could stop them. "I do not know when it happened. Maybe that first day when you stood alone against all of them and refused to bow. Maybe when you laughed at my attempts to speak your language. Maybe every moment in between. I love you, and I know this world is not kind to love like ours, but I do not care. I will protect you with everything I am for as long as I draw breath." What should Aiyana say? If you want Aiyana to confess she loves him too, continue reading from the paragraph that begins with tears spilled down Aiyana's cheeks. If you want Aiyana to express fear about what their love means in this world, continue reading from the paragraph that begins with Aiyana's hands trembled. Tears spilled down Aiyana's cheeks, but she was smiling. That rare and radiant smile that made Samuel feel like he could conquer anything. "I have loved you since you stepped in front of that crowd for a woman you did not know," she said. "I loved you when you gave me space to grieve without asking for anything. I loved you when you held me without touching me, when you taught me letters and treated me like I was worthy of learning. I love you, Samuel Hartley, and I am tired of being afraid to say it." He reached for her then, pulling her into his arms, and when his lips met hers, Samuel felt like he was finally coming home after years of wandering. She tasted of hope and new beginnings, of wild honey and summer rain. She was everything he had stopped believing existed in this harsh world. They married in the spring, in a small ceremony witnessed only by the horses and the mountains and the vast blue sky. Samuel spoke vows in English, and Aiyana spoke vows in her language, and between them, they created something new, a union that needed no approval from any church or government. But peace never lasted long in the territory. The trouble came on a hot July afternoon. A group of men from town, led by the mayor and a gunslinger named Marcus Cole, who had been hired specifically for violence, rode onto their land. "You have been warned, Hartley," the mayor shouted. "Having that Apache woman here is an offense against decent folks. We are giving you one chance. Send her away or we will burn this ranch to the ground with both of you in it." Samuel stepped onto the porch, his rifle in his hands. Aiyana stood beside him, not hiding, never hiding. "This is my land," Samuel said. "This is my wife. You have no authority here." Marcus Cole grinned, his hand moving toward his gun. What happens next? If you want a violent confrontation, continue reading from the paragraph that begins with Marcus Drew first. If you want an unexpected ally to arrive, continue reading from the paragraph that begins with the sound of hoofbeats made everyone freeze. The sound of hoofbeats made everyone freeze. A group of riders appeared over the ridge, and Samuel's heart nearly stopped when he recognized them. Sheriff Tom Patterson from the next county, accompanied by 10 deputies, rode hard toward the ranch. "Everyone stand down," Sheriff Patterson commanded, pulling his horse to a stop between the two groups. He was an older man with a white mustache and eyes that had seen too much injustice to tolerate more. Mayor Crawford, I have received reports about threats of violence against citizens of this territory. Mrs. Hartley here is a legal resident, married to an American citizen, and under the full protection of the law. She is Apache, the mayor sputtered, and my grandmother was Irish, which made her no less of a person. I suggest you and your men leave before I start making arrests. Marcus Cole's hand had not left his gun. We were hired for a job. Then you were hired to break the law. That makes you outlaws, and I have full authority to deal with outlaws as I see fit. The standoff stretched for an eternal moment. Then slowly, Marcus raised his hands and backed his horse away. The mayor, seeing his hired muscle retreat, had no choice but to follow. As the riders disappeared into the dust, Sheriff Patterson turned to Samuel and Aiyana. You both take care, he said, tipping his hat. The world is changing slowly, but it is changing. Hold on to what you have. That night, Samuel held Aiyana close, listening to her heartbeat as they lay together under quilts she had stitched from fabric scraps. I was so afraid, she admitted. Not of dying, but of losing you. You will never lose me, he promised. Not today, not ever. We walked through fire to find each other, and I am not letting go. She lifted her head to look at him, her eyes shining in the darkness. I am carrying your child, Samuel. I was waiting for the right moment to tell you. Joy exploded through him, fierce and overwhelming. He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips, whispering thanks to whatever power had brought this woman into his life. Outside, coyotes sang to the moon, and the desert wind carried the scent of sagebrush and promise. Their story was not finished. There would be more challenges, more prejudice to face, more battles to fight, but they would face them together. The cowboy had protected the Apache woman while others walked away, and in doing so, he had found something more precious than gold, more valuable than all the cattle in the territory. He had found love, redemption, and a future worth living for.